My name is Emily Carter, and I was 37 years old the night my husband left me on the side of a dark highway. I had no idea that the argument we had in the car would be the last real conversation we would ever have as a married couple. I also had no idea that his mother had already begun the process of trying to take the house I had poured most of my savings and bonuses into. My name is on the deed. I put 65% of the down payment down with money I had earned on my own. That detail matters more than I ever understood at the time. I worked as a senior commercial real estate broker for a large firm downtown. I specialized in historic properties and adaptive reuse projects. It was demanding work, but it paid well, and I was good at it. My husband Daniel worked in the planning department for the city. His salary was steady, but much smaller than mine. We had never made it a source of conflict, or so I believed. I paid the larger share of the mortgage. He covered the utilities, and we split groceries and other expenses. It felt balanced. It felt like a partnership. The house itself was a 1920 craftsman bungalow on a quiet street lined with mature trees. I had fallen in love with it the moment I saw the wide front porch and the original built-in cabinetry. We bought it 18 months into our marriage. I handled most of the negotiations and the paperwork because that was my world. Daniel was happy to let me lead on anything related to the house. I thought it was because he trusted me. I understand now that it was because he and his mother already had other plans. His mother, Patricia Carter, was a tall, slender woman with perfectly styled silver hair and a voice that could sound warm while delivering the coldest observations. She called Daniel every day, sometimes twice. She had opinions about everything, including how we maintained the house, how often we visited her, and whether I was putting enough effort into becoming part of the Carter family legacy. In the beginning, I tried to be patient. I told myself that difficult mothers-in-law were a common experience and that her behavior came from love for her only son. I was wrong. Patricia did very little without a clear purpose. The Sunday dinner that changed everything was at her house as usual. She lived in a large colonial-style home about 40 minutes from us. The table was always set with cloth napkins and the good china, even when it was just the three of us. That particular evening, the roast was dry, and the conversation stayed carefully neutral until dessert. Patricia folded her napkin with deliberate precision and looked at me with the small, tight smile she reserved for moments when she was about to say something she considered important. "Emily," she said, "I have been meaning to speak with you about the house. The market in your neighborhood has been very strong lately. Daniel and I have been looking at some lovely, smaller properties closer to me. It might be time to consider selling and moving somewhere more practical for the long term." I looked at Daniel. He was staring at his water glass and not meeting my eyes. "Patricia, the house is not for sale," I said as calmly as I could. "We are not planning to move." She gave a small, dismissive wave of her hand. "Of course, it is just something to think about. Daniel agrees it makes financial sense." "Do you not, sweetheart?" Daniel murmured something non-committal and kept looking down. That was the moment the first real crack appeared. I said very little for the rest of the meal. I helped clear the table. I thanked Patricia for dinner in a level voice. We drove home in silence for the first 10 minutes. Then I asked him why he had not told me his mother was looking at properties for us. He said it was not a big deal and that she was only trying to help. I told him I was tired of her inserting herself into every financial decision we made. I told him her suggestions always carried an agenda and that his silence made me feel alone in my own marriage. I did not raise my voice, but I did not soften the words either. Daniel pulled the car over onto the gravel shoulder of Route 7. It was a long, empty stretch of road between his mother's neighborhood and ours. There were no streetlights. just dark trees on one side and a chain-link fence on the other. "Get out," he said. I thought he was joking at first. Then I saw his face. He leaned across me and opened my door. The night air was cold and smelled of damp leaves and asphalt. I got out because some part of me still believed he would stop and apologize and ask me to get back in. He did not. He put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. I watched his taillights grow smaller until they disappeared around a curve. I stood there for a long time. My phone had almost no signal. The nearest rideshare driver was more than 25 minutes away. I started walking along the shoulder toward the direction of home. After about 15 minutes, a pickup truck slowed down. An older man asked if I was all right. I told him my car had broken down and I needed a ride to the nearest gas station. He drove me there without asking too many questions. I called a cab from the station and finally made it home after midnight. The house was dark and quiet when I let myself in. I stood in the kitchen for a long time with the lights off. I could hear the old floorboards settling. I could smell the faint trace of the coffee I had made that morning. Everything looked exactly as it always did, but something inside me had shifted. I could not sleep. Around 2 a.m, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and logged into our mortgage account. I told myself I was just checking the balance because I was restless. What I found instead was a notification about a recent inquiry into a cash-out refinance. The request had been started 3 weeks earlier. It listed both our names, but I had never initiated it, and Daniel had never mentioned it. I clicked through to the documents. There was a scanned page that looked like a power of attorney form. My signature was at the bottom. I had never signed any such document. I sat very still and stared at the screen. The house was quiet around me. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded and then faded. I felt a cold, clear certainty settle in my chest. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. Something had been set in motion without my knowledge, and it involved the one thing I had worked hardest to protect. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. I did not cry. I did not call Daniel. I simply sat there and let the weight of what I had just seen settle into my body. I knew I would not be able to unknow it, and I knew that whatever came next, I would not face it the same way I had faced everything else in this marriage. I would not absorb it quietly and tell myself it would get better. I would find out exactly what had been done, and I would decide what to do about it. That decision began in the quiet kitchen at 2 a.m, while the rest of the neighborhood slept. I had no idea yet how far Patricia and Daniel had already gone. But I knew I was no longer willing to pretend I did not see the signs. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside began to turn gray. The printed pages from the mortgage portal lay in front of me in a neat stack. I had taken screenshots of everything and saved them to a private folder on my phone as well. The power of attorney form looked almost convincing at first glance. Someone had done a careful job copying my signature, but I knew my own handwriting. The loop on the capital E was slightly off, and the pressure on the final stroke of the last name was heavier than I ever made it. I had never signed that document. I also knew I had never started any refinance request. The notification showed the inquiry had been opened 3 weeks earlier on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in a client meeting across the city. Daniel had been working from home that day. I closed my eyes for a moment and tried to remember if anything had felt different when I came back that evening. He had been quiet. He had said he was tired. I had believed him. I opened my laptop again and logged into the shared email account we used for household matters. I rarely checked it because Daniel usually handled the utility bills and service calls. The inbox contained the usual messages about internet service and trash pickup. But there was also a thread I had never seen before. It was between Daniel and his mother. The subject line read simply, "Property options." I clicked it open. The first message was from Patricia, and it was dated 4 months earlier. She wrote that the market was strong and that it would be wise to consider unlocking some of the equity in the house before interest rates moved again. She said she had spoken with an attorney who specialized in family property matters and that he could help structure things properly. Daniel had replied 2 days later. He said he was not sure how I would react and that I had always been protective of the house. Patricia answered that sometimes people needed to be protected from their own short-sighted decisions. She wrote that the house was a Carter family asset now and that it should stay under proper family control. I read the exchange 3 times. My hand stayed very still on the table. There was another thread a month later. This one mentioned a power of attorney and the need to have it ready in case I became difficult. Patricia wrote that she had a contact who could prepare the paperwork quietly. Daniel asked if that was really necessary. His mother replied that it was better to have everything in place before any problems arose. She added that once the documents were signed, it would be much simpler to move forward with the sale or refinance without unnecessary delays. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. They had been planning this for months. They had discussed how to handle me if I resisted. I kept reading. There were no dramatic declarations. The language stayed careful and practical. They spoke about me as if I were an obstacle, rather than a person who lived in the house and paid most of the mortgage. One line from Patricia stayed with me. She wrote that I had become too attached to the property and that sometimes it was necessary to help people let go of things that were not truly theirs to control. I closed the email tab. I opened the browser again and went to the county recorder's website. I searched for any recent documents filed under our address. Nothing new appeared yet. That gave me a small measure of relief, but not much. I knew that if they had already obtained a power of attorney, they could try to record documents without my physical presence. I needed to act before anything else was filed. I looked at the clock on the stove. It was almost 5 in the morning. I had been sitting there for nearly 3 hours. My body felt heavy, but my mind was sharp and clear, in a way it had not been in a long time. I made a pot of coffee and poured a cup. I carried it back to the table and sat down again. I opened a new document on my laptop and began to make notes. I listed every date I could remember when something had felt slightly off over the past 6 months. I wrote down the exact time I had discovered the refinance inquiry. I noted the names that appeared in the email thread. I wrote down the phrase Patricia had used about the house being a Carter family asset. I saved the document and made 2 backup copies on separate drives. Then I opened my phone and searched for estate attorneys in the city who had no connection to Daniel or his family. I found 3 names that looked promising. I chose the one whose website emphasized protecting individual property rights in family disputes. I sent a short message through the contact form explaining that I needed an urgent consultation regarding possible unauthorized documents involving my home. I did not give many details. I simply said the matter was time-sensitive and that I wanted to speak with someone as soon as possible. I received an automated reply saying the office would respond within 1 business day. I closed the laptop and stood up. The kitchen was filled with the soft gray light of early morning. I walked through the house slowly. I ran my hand along the original wood trim in the living room. I looked at the built-in shelves I had chosen and the light that came through the windows at this hour. This was my home. I had chosen every detail. I had paid for most of it with money I earned. I was not going to let it be taken from me through quiet paperwork and careful planning done behind my back. I showered and dressed for work as usual. When Daniel came downstairs, he looked tired. He asked if I had slept. I told him I had not slept well. He nodded and said he had a long day ahead. He kissed me on the cheek the way he always did before leaving. I stood at the door and watched him drive away. Then I called my office and said I needed to take a personal day. I told them I would be reachable if anything urgent came up. After I hung up, I sat on the front porch with another cup of coffee. The street was quiet. A neighbor walked their dog past the house and waved. I waved back. Everything looked normal from the outside. Inside, I was building a record. I spent the rest of the morning going through every shared account I could access. I checked credit reports. I looked at recent changes to any passwords or security questions. I found 2 small attempts to add Patricia's email as a recovery address on one of our utility accounts. Both attempts had been made in the last month. Neither had succeeded because I had received the verification emails and ignored them thinking they were mistakes. I also found a message in Daniel's work email folder that he had forwarded to his personal account. It was from a man named Richard Hale. The subject was estate planning consultation follow-up. In the message, Richard Hale thanked Daniel for the meeting and said he had prepared the initial documents as discussed. He mentioned that once the power of attorney was properly executed, they could move forward with the next steps regarding the property. There was no mention of my name in the email. I read it twice. Then I saved a copy and added the date and time to my notes. By early afternoon, I had a folder on my computer with more than 30 pages of records. I had timestamps, screenshots, emails, and account activity logs. I also had the name of the attorney Patricia and Daniel had consulted without telling me. I closed the laptop and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard. The trees were full and green. The fence I had repaired last summer still looked straight and solid. I thought about how much work I had put into this place, not just money, but time and care. I thought about the conversations I had tried to have with Daniel about his mother's interference. I thought about all the times I had told myself I was overreacting. I was not overreacting. I picked up my phone and checked my messages. There was still nothing from the estate attorney I had contacted that morning. I decided I would call the office directly if I did not hear back by the end of the day. I was no longer willing to wait and see what else they might try to file while I was at work or asleep. I needed to know exactly where I stood legally, and I needed to know it soon. I made myself a simple lunch and ate it standing at the counter. Then I went back to the table and opened my notes again. I read through everything I had written since 2 in the morning. The picture was becoming clearer with every hour. Patricia had been the one pushing the plan. Daniel had gone along with it. They had both believed they could move slowly enough that I would not notice until it was too late. They had underestimated how closely I watched the things that mattered to me. I closed the document and sat back in the chair. For the first time since I had found the refinance inquiry, I felt something other than shock. I felt a quiet, steady anger. It was not loud. It did not make me want to scream or throw things. It made me want to be precise. I wanted every document they had touched. I wanted every conversation they had recorded or forgotten to delete. And I wanted to know exactly what Richard Hale had prepared for them. I stood up and walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room where I kept important papers. I pulled out the original deed to the house and the closing documents from when we bought it. I made copies of everything and placed the originals in a small fireproof box I kept in the back of the bedroom closet. Then I put the copies in my work bag along with the notes I had made. I was not going to leave anything important in the house unattended. When Daniel came home that evening, I was already in the kitchen making dinner. He asked how my day had been. I told him it had been quiet. He nodded and went upstairs to change. I stood at the stove and stirred the sauce I was heating. My hands were steady. My voice had been calm. Inside, I was already building the next layer of the record. I knew I would not confront him yet, not until I had spoken with an attorney and understood every option I had. but I also knew I would not let another week pass while they moved pieces on a board I could not see. The house was still mine. My name was still on the deed, and I was no longer the only one keeping secrets. The next morning, I received a call from the estate attorney's office. The woman on the phone said her name was Margaret Ellison and that she could see me at 10:30 if I was available. I told her I would be there. I arrived a few minutes early and sat in a small waiting area with soft gray chairs and a low table, holding magazines I did not open. When Margaret Ellison came out to greet me, she was a woman in her early 50s with short dark hair and a direct way of looking at people. She led me into a conference room and closed the door. I placed the folder I had brought on the table between us. I told her I needed to understand what my legal position was regarding my house and whether anyone could act on my behalf without my knowledge. She listened without interrupting while I described what I had found. When I finished, she asked to see the documents. She studied the refinance inquiry and the power of attorney page for a long time. Then she looked up at me. "This power of attorney appears to be forged," she said. "The signature is close but not exact, and more importantly, you have no memory of signing it and no record of any meeting where it was discussed. That alone is enough to make it invalid." She asked if I had checked the county records recently. I told her I had checked the night before and nothing new had been recorded yet. She nodded and said that was good, but that we should not wait. She explained that once a forged power of attorney is used to record any document, it becomes much harder to unwind the situation. She recommended that I immediately place a notice on the property records stating that I was the sole owner and that no power of attorney had been granted by me. She also suggested I speak with a family law attorney about filing for divorce or at least a legal separation to create a formal record that would freeze major financial transactions. I asked her what would happen if Daniel and his mother tried to sell or refinance before I could stop them. She said that any buyer or lender who relied on a forged power of attorney would have a very difficult time enforcing the transaction once the forgery was proven. But she added that prevention was always better than correction. I asked her to help me file the notice on the property records that same day. She said she could have it prepared within the hour and filed electronically. While we waited for her assistant to prepare the document, I asked her about Richard Hale. She recognized the name. He is known for working with families on what he calls legacy planning, she said. In practice, that often means helping one generation protect assets from another. She asked if I wanted her to contact him. I said no. I wanted to gather more information first. After I signed the notice, she told me to go home and continue documenting everything. She said I should avoid any large financial moves myself until I had spoken with a divorce attorney. She gave me the name of someone she trusted who handled these situations with discretion. I thanked her and left with a copy of the filed notice in my bag. On the drive home, I stopped at a coffee shop and sat in the parking lot for a while. I called the family law attorney Margaret had recommended. Her name was Susan Park. I left a message explaining that I needed an urgent consultation regarding possible forgery of documents related to my home and marriage. She called back within 20 minutes. We spoke for almost half an hour. She asked many of the same questions Margaret had asked and gave similar advice. She said the forged power of attorney gave me strong grounds for both civil and potentially criminal action, but that the first priority was protecting the house. She offered to file a notice of Ellis pendens if I decided to move forward with divorce proceedings. That would put any potential buyer or lender on notice that the property was in dispute. I told her I was not ready to file yet, but that I wanted to understand every option. She said she would prepare a retainer agreement and send it to me. I could sign it whenever I was ready. I drove the rest of the way home feeling both heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because the reality of what Daniel and Patricia had done was now confirmed by two separate attorneys. Lighter because I was no longer facing it alone. When I walked into the house, Daniel was already home. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He looked up when I came in. "You are home early," he said. I told him I had taken care of some personal matters. He nodded and went back to his screen. I made myself a cup of tea and sat across from him. I asked him how his day had been. He said it had been busy and that his mother had called twice. I asked what she had wanted. He said she was just checking in. I took a sip of tea and set the cup down carefully. I asked him if he and his mother had ever discussed the house with anyone else. He looked up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean, have you talked to any attorneys or financial people about the house without telling me?" He closed his laptop slowly. "Why are you asking me this?" he said. His voice was careful. I told him I had seen some unusual activity on the mortgage account. I did not say how much I had seen. I wanted to see what he would volunteer. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said his mother had mentioned something about estate planning a while ago. He said he had told her we were not interested. I nodded and took another sip of tea. I did not tell him I already knew that was a lie. I did not tell him I had the emails. I simply sat with him in the kitchen while the afternoon light moved across the table. Later that evening, after Daniel had gone upstairs, I opened my laptop again. I checked the county records one more time. The notice Margaret Ellison had filed was already visible. It stated clearly that Emily Carter was the record owner and that no valid power of attorney had been executed by her. I felt a small measure of relief. At least one layer of protection was now in place. I also checked my email. There was a message from Susan Park with the retainer agreement attached. I read it carefully. Then I signed it electronically and sent it back. I knew that once I took this step, there would be no going back to the way things had been. But the way things had been was already gone. I had simply been the last one to see it. I closed the laptop and went upstairs. Daniel was already in bed reading. I changed into my nightclothes and got in beside him. He reached over and turned off the light. In the dark, I lay on my back and listened to him breathing. I thought about the emails I had read and the forged signature and the conversations he had chosen not to have with me. I thought about the house and how much of myself I had put into it. I thought about the two attorneys I had spoken with that day and the quiet steps I had already taken. None of it felt dramatic. It felt necessary. I closed my eyes and let myself rest. Tomorrow I would decide how much longer I was willing to share a bed and a life with a man who had helped his mother plan to take my home without my knowledge. I already knew the answer. I was simply giving myself one more night to be sure. I waited 2 more days before I confronted him. I used that time to finish gathering everything I needed and to speak once more with Susan Park. She told me I had enough evidence to move forward whenever I chose. She also reminded me that once I opened the conversation, there would be no way to put the pieces back the way they were. I told her I understood. On the 3rd evening, I came home from work at the usual time. I cooked dinner the way I always did. Daniel sat at the table and talked about his day as if nothing had changed. After we finished eating, I cleared the plates and put them in the dishwasher. Then I went to the living room and brought back the folder I had prepared. I placed it on the table between us. Daniel looked at it and then at me. "What is that?" he asked. I opened the folder and took out the first page. It was a clear copy of the refinance inquiry that had been started without my knowledge. I slid it across the table to him. He picked it up and stared at it for a long time without speaking. I took out the next page. It was the power of attorney form with the signature that was not mine. I placed it next to the first document. Then I took out the printed email thread between him and his mother. I laid the pages out one by one until the table was covered with evidence. Daniel did not touch any of them after the first page. He kept his hands flat on the table. I sat down across from him and waited. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Where did you get these?" he asked. I told him I had found the refinance notification while checking the mortgage account. I told him I had seen the emails because I still had access to the shared household account. I did not tell him I had also spoken with 2 attorneys. I wanted to hear what he would say first. He was quiet for another long moment. Then he said his mother had been worried about the house. He said she believed it would be better if some of the equity was moved into a structure that protected it for the family. I asked him if that structure included her name on the documents. He did not answer. I asked him if he had known about the power of attorney. He looked down at the table. He said his mother had told him it was just a precaution in case something happened to me. I asked him if he had believed that. He did not answer again. I reached across the table and turned one of the email pages so he could see the date. It was from 4 months ago. I asked him how long he had been discussing the house with his mother without telling me. He said it had started as casual conversations. He said he had not realized how far she was willing to go. I told him I did not believe that. I told him the emails showed he had known they were preparing documents and that he had gone along with it. He finally looked up at me. His face was tired in a way I had not seen before. He said he had not wanted things to happen this way. He said his mother had convinced him it was the right thing for everyone in the long run. I asked him what part of forging my signature and trying to take equity out of a house I had paid for was the right thing. He had no answer for that. I closed the folder and pulled it back toward me. I told him I had already spoken with attorneys. I told him I had filed a notice on the property records stating that the power of attorney was invalid. I told him I had retained counsel and that any further attempts to act on my behalf without my consent would be treated as fraud. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. He looked at the folder and then at me. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to leave," I said. "I want you to pack what you need for the next few days and go stay somewhere else while we figure out what happens next." He stared at me as if he had not expected those words. I told him I was not asking. I was telling him. The house was mine. My name was on the deed. I had already protected it legally. There was nothing left for him to negotiate from inside these walls. He stood up slowly. For a moment, I thought he might argue or try to explain again. Instead, he walked to the stairs and went up to the bedroom. I heard him moving around for almost 20 minutes. When he came back down, he was carrying a duffel bag and his laptop. He set the bag by the door and stood there looking at me. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was quiet. I did not answer. He picked up the bag and opened the front door. Before he stepped outside, he turned back one more time. "I never wanted it to come to this," he said. Then he walked out and closed the door behind him. I listened to his car start and pull away from the curb. The sound of the engine faded down the street until the house was quiet again. I stayed at the kitchen table for a long time after he left. The folder of documents was still in front of me. I opened it again and looked through the pages one more time. Everything I needed was there. I had the proof. I had the legal protection on the house. I had already spoken with attorneys who knew exactly what to do next. I stood up and walked through the room slowly. I turned off the lights one by one until only the small lamp in the living room remained on. I sat on the couch and looked at the empty space where Daniel's car had been parked. For the first time in many months, I felt the house belong entirely to me again. Not because he was gone, but because I had finally stopped pretending that we were still building something together. I picked up my phone and sent a short message to Susan Park. I told her that Daniel had left and that I was ready to move forward with the next steps. She replied within minutes, asking if I wanted to meet the following morning. I told her yes. Then I put the phone down and sat in the quiet living room with the folder of evidence on the coffee table beside me. Outside the street was dark and still. Inside the old house settled around me the way it always did at night. I was alone in it now, but I did not feel afraid. I felt clear. I had given Daniel every chance to be honest with me. He had chosen his mother and her plans instead. That choice had consequences. I was ready to face them. Chast 5. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Susan Park handled everything with quiet precision. She filed the divorce papers 2 weeks after Daniel left. Because I already had clear documentation of the forged power of attorney and the emails showing their coordinated plan, his side had very little room to negotiate. Patricia tried to involve herself at first. She called Daniel's attorney and even attempted to reach me directly. I did not speak with her. Susan sent a formal letter stating that all future communication must go through legal counsel. After that, the attempt stopped. During the settlement negotiations, Daniel agreed to sign over his remaining interest in the house in exchange for a fair buyout of his share. I was able to arrange the financing through my own resources and the equity I had already built. The house stayed entirely in my name. The forged power of attorney was formally declared invalid by the court. No refinance or sale could move forward without my signature. Patricia faced no criminal charges in the end, but the civil judgment and the public record of what she had attempted followed her. More importantly, her influence over Daniel was broken. He chose not to fight for the things she had pushed him to take. In the months that followed, I saw him only through our attorneys. The man I had once shared a life with became a signature on documents, and nothing more. I sold a few pieces of furniture we had bought together and replaced them with things I chose alone. I repainted the bedroom the soft green color I had always wanted. I planted new flowers along the front walkway. Small changes, but each one reminded me that this house was no longer a shared project that could be taken from me. It was mine. On a warm Saturday morning in early autumn, I sat on the front porch with a cup of coffee. The street was quiet. Sunlight moved through the leaves of the old trees. I thought about the night Daniel had left me on the dark highway. I thought about the moment I opened the mortgage account and saw the forged documents. I thought about every time I had stayed silent because I wanted to keep the peace. I realized I had been carrying the weight of that silence for far too long. The house had not changed. The neighborhood had not changed. What had changed was me. I no longer believed that love required me to shrink or to look away when something felt wrong. I no longer believed that keeping the peace was more important than protecting what I had built with my own hands. I had learned that some people will smile while they plan to take everything from you, and I had learned that the only real protection is to see clearly and to act before it is too late. I finished my coffee and set the cup on the small table beside my chair. The morning was still and bright. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at home in my own life. If you have ever had to draw a line with people you once trusted, or if you have ever stayed quiet for too long, hoping things would get better on their own, I would really like to hear from you. Many of us have been in that place where we tell ourselves it is not that bad, or that we are overreacting, or that keeping the peace matters more than telling the truth. Sometimes it takes losing almost everything to understand how much we were already giving away. If this story stayed with you, I would be grateful if you left a comment below and shared what part resonated most. Your words often help others who might be going through something similar feel less alone. If you found value in hearing how one woman chose to stop shrinking and start protecting what was hers, I would appreciate it if you liked this video and subscribe to the channel. I share these stories because real life is full of quiet battles that never make the news, but change everything for the people living them. Subscribing helps more people find these stories when they need them. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you leave here remembering that your name on the deed, your effort, and your boundaries all matter. You do not have to earn the right to keep what you built. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to let it be taken. I will see you in the next one.